Now we'll go to our next session, which is on SBOMs. I think Cassie is on. Cassie, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can
Okay.
hear you. And let me share my screen one moment.
Yep. And maybe you can start by introducing yourself, and then
Yes,
I'll
I
introduce
will.
myself once.
Is the screen sharing okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So, hi, I'm Cassie Crossley. I am formerly with Schneider Electric, but I've been working in the product security and SBOM space for many years as part of NTIA and CISA and different groups. I'm also the author of Software Supply Chain Security, an O'Reilly book, and I'm an advisor and corporate director for Cybeats Technology, which provides SBOM management solutions. Good to see everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassie. So I'm Soundharya. I know I've been moderating a lot of the conference today. I'm VP of Global Digital Products and Connectivity at Vaputam Inc. So Vaputam is a supplier of, it's a medical device manufacturer for respiratory care solutions. So I lead the product security enterprise as well as digital products at Vaputam. I came from Baxter, where I used to lead product security. So I have over 20 years of security, specifically products, the last probably 15 years. I'm co-chair of Archimedes. I've been part of Archimedes for a long time. And thank you, Kevin, for making all this possible. So,
Great.
yep, I'll get to Cassie. You want to share your screen? Yep.
Yes. So we'll start with what is an SBOM and what is it? I know this probably for this audience, we'll go quickly through these points. But just if you're not aware, an SBOM provides a machine readable inventory. And this is generally not just the direct inventory items, such as, for example, the name of your software, but it also can be the open source or proprietary packages and anything that they may also leverage. So in this case, Bob's browser may leverage a compression engine or something. So this is all part of the software bill of materials. And we heard earlier the FDA requirements, which includes the NTIA components, but some additional items such as end of support. And why this matters to healthcare, I have been a large proponent and collector of SBOMs for vulnerability management when I was at Schneider Electric, and we had thousands of products and thousands of SBOMs. And that gave us that information, just like it does in the healthcare space, to understand what vulnerabilities may potentially be there because you're understanding those components. Because software supply chain risk really does happen. There are vulnerabilities throughout the product, and we want to, from a standpoint of patient safety and what could happen, safety, whether it be in industrial control systems where I come from, or in medical devices, and even the products, for example, that it's connecting to. We heard that update systems could have that information is also required by the FDA because something could happen to those update systems in regards to submitting and delivering those updates to the environments. So it's very important for the regulators, for the MDMs themselves, so that they can understand what they have, and in many cases, now you're seeing the HCOs request those SBOMs so that they can understand the potential risk. And so, what is an SBOM and what isn't it? And we're hearing about some of that. I just mentioned about using it for vulnerability handling. And it's not going to say in the SBOM itself, you have this vulnerability. That is generally in maybe the VEX or the VDR, as has been mentioned in some of the Q&A today. And so what it's doing is it's providing you that visibility so that you can make a risk-based decision, both from the actual manufacturer or the creator or software publisher, but essentially as a operator of that information, you could look, you may not have the full answers, but it will help you understand more and give you that transparency and visibility. But what it isn't is a security assessment. It doesn't have the information that says you're using this device in this situation. You may have other compensating controls, for example, firewalls or some other aspect that is controlling and securing that device or that software or some other aspect. So it's not going to know exactly how you've implemented it in your environment. And it also is not a substitute for vulnerability handling, which means that an SBOM, let's say that the device was released in January of this year and a new vulnerability came out. Well, the SBOM doesn't update because the software and the firmware has stayed the same, but the vulnerabilities and what has happened in the environment of what's used, that is changing every day and by the hour. We see new CVEs. So you really have to leverage maybe the tools that you have or the processes that you have to understand what's new in your environment. And so I think that overall, an SBOM is best leveraged when you've got continuous monitoring as part of that aspect. And we're going to talk about some of those challenges in a few minutes. But what I just want to make clear that the SBOMs, when we say machine readable, it doesn't mean a PDF. Now, PDF SBOMs, especially in the world today, if you want to quickly look and see what Instagram is using for their open source components, you can go to the About page. That is not a machine readable, but it may be useful for what you're doing. But in regards to the SBOMs themselves, we're still maturing as an industry. And I think that especially with the work that the FDA is doing with it inspecting the SBOMs, I could say that the majority of SBOMs, when they are delivered to somebody, they may sit on a shelf. And so the quality of that SBOM is not inspected or evaluated. And so you really need to understand what you're going to leverage that SBOM for. It could be just for procurement to say, oh, I'm not allowed to use these kind of components, or I need to be aware. But that continuous monitoring is really something that is, I think, improving how the quality of SBOMs is. And let me explain what I mean by that. Is, for example, when let's just say there was a open source component that was in a product of ours at Schneider, and when we first announced some of that vulnerabilities out there and put out a security disclosure, we did not list one of our products as having a vulnerability. Well, what happened was a week later, we had to update that document to say that it was affected by this CVE. And one of my customers said, why is that? And I said, one of my third-party suppliers, who I did not have the SBOM for, because it was a compiled binary, they told me they were at risk. So having that dependency depth, something that you don't normally see, especially if you're using other proprietary components, is very important. From an open source, you may see that depth of dependencies, but you may not see that specifically if you are bringing in somebody else's components. So it's very important for you to understand the full depth of the SBOM and what you're leveraging and the quality of what you're receiving. So in the future, receiving that SBOM from that supplier was really important. But again, the quality, especially at the beginning several years ago, was very poor. There were a lot of unaddressed items in that SBOM. So we know it's a growing field, and products are better able to create SBOMs, or you're able to create the SBOMs from that from maybe a build, and we'll talk more about that. So I just wanted to, I'm not going to reiterate what was talked about before. In fact, I want to update this picture here because I heard a few more on here, but there are a lot of SBOM guidance requirements around the world from the healthcare from just in general, let's just say digital components. And there's even, I have a different picture that includes also some automotive. And so these SBOM requirements are ever changing. Like I just saw on the previous presentation that there's a draft requirement out of Singapore, and I've worked with Singapore a lot on the OT side. But if they're going to be requiring SBOMs for medical, I want to definitely take a look at that. But this is something that you need to be aware of. But the easiest thing is to automatically have those SBOMs as part of your build process and being able to leverage them both for your vulnerability management, but also providing them to the regulatory authorities and to your customers. And now I'll turn it over I'm not going to cover this item because we talked quite a bit about the US guidelines, but just in general, if it was referenced in the FDA piece that they use the NTA guidelines, but I don't know if it has been updated for some of the additions like component hash. So just wanted to mention that there are those changing guidelines for these different suppliers that are out there every day. And for example, the EU CRA, a lot of the references are to Germany. All right, I will turn it over.
All right. Thank you, Cassie. So this is a two-part kind of presentation. The first part, which Cassie went over, was what is expected of an SBOM, common pitfalls, etc. And the second half of it, which I'm presenting, is sort of my experience, as a medical device manufacturer, sort of the challenges, things that we encounter, and it kind of dovetails nicely into a lot of the discussion that's already happened. And I'm also interested in hearing other medical devices manufacturers have the same experience. So regarding the FDA expectations, I think Justin did a lot there, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. But there is an expectation that FDA has that SBOMs is built into the quality management system and pre-market documentation so that there's good software transparency. And Justin talked a lot about how third-party suppliers and being able to provide those SBOM elements, kind of making sure contractually you're able to get that. And if it's open source, then you should be able to get that fairly easily. And then, the SBOM is part of the evidence package, right? It's about maintainability. It's about vulnerability management. It's about update readiness. So a lot of things that are helpful. And then the operationalization part of it, right? How to do that. I think that's where there's a lot of challenges right now in the generation, getting your hands around it, right? As a medical device manufacturer, especially if you have a broad variety of products. Then you start getting into, well, how do I generate it? How do I validate it? How do I keep it such that it can be ready to answer mode, right? So I'll go into some of those challenges based on my experience. But if there are any medical device manufacturers in the audience, I'm very interested in hearing. So please post your comments in the question answer part of the webinar. Okay, so the challenge number one, and I kind of alluded to it, managing the complexity and operation. When you have a wide variety of products, it significantly increases cost, complexity, and operational load in SBOM management, right? For example, right, you could have cloud products, you could have embedded devices, you could have mobile apps, you could have artificial intelligence bots, and other products. So you have a whole variety of things that are maybe in your toolbox. And even as a small medical manufacturer, we already have a number of this variety. And each product uses its own programming languages, its own dependency managers. So the tech stack is different, right? So there are more SBOM tool chains and SBOM formats, Cyclone DX versus SPDX. And this multiple tool chains, causes increased maintenance requirements. So each team is kind of doing its own thing, right? You've got the embedded device team saying, hey, I want this tool chain because that's what works for me, right? And then the cloud products are saying, well, that doesn't really work for us. Here's what we want. And then mobile apps is even harder, right? I found out that it's actually not easy. You don't have that many tools available to do mobile apps. And AI is a whole different ballgame. So basically, the complexity increases. And I think that is a challenge that has to be overcome. Um, and one immediate example in my recent time is that Linux products, they use Yocto and they want to produce their own um, SPDX format SBOM, whereas cloud products are like, no, we want the tool, right? And as a management solution, you've got this huge variety. So just wanted to mention this as challenge number one. Challenge number two, inconsistent SBOM quality across product lines. So you have different teams using these different tools, and they're producing the SBOMs, and it's hard to control the level of dependency. I know Cassie just mentioned it's good to have that level of dependency, but then where do you stop, right? Like how far into the dependency depth do you go? There's also, the different naming conventions and metadata consistency. For example, we tried using some tools, and the metadata coming from two different tools is different. So then you're trying to figure out, well, which one do I take and which one's real, right? And sometimes the answer is both are real. They're just looking at it from a different perspective. There's also different update frequencies. So, you can imagine the opportunities for inconsistency, which complicates the vulnerability correlation, the customer delivery, compliance audits. So, a picture of how the quality, you got to determine the quality, but for each product, it becomes its own exercise. That's the second challenge. The third one, and I'm sure by now it's obvious that the amount of work is growing, right? And it's not linear anymore, right? As the products grow, and I think not just products, but product varieties, right? If you have 2 of each product variety versus 6 of one type, your product variety causes this non-linear jump into the work. So then you have more to store and version as each product evolves and has multiple versions, more maintenance, and then each SBOM has to be generated at each release. And you are going to have multiple component SBOMs just because how you have a firmware plus cloud plus mobile app. So you might have multiple component SBOMs that are releasing. And then last but not least here, the cost of change, right? Generally itself, in medical device industry, change is costly, right? That's why everybody says shift left. But now with the SBOM management, any change in this becomes costly because you have to update the whole sequence, the formats, the pipelines, generation, and all of it takes time, right? And as a business, you're still under the thing of timeline, right? You want to release a product at a certain timeline to hit the market. So that's kind of the higher operational overload. And I know I said that's a third challenge, but to me, that third challenge kind of like trumps everything else. The fourth challenge is increased vulnerability noise and increased dependencies. So I know one of the main reasons you do SBOM is to have it as an input into your vulnerability scanning pipeline. But as you have more unique dependency trees and more CVEs to triage, you could get more false positives, right? So now you have an exercise into like dealing and kind of looking at CVEs and saying, no, this is a false positive, this is not a false positive, this is actually true. And that evaluation and growth of that task is adds up to it. And for leadership, this is a scaling problem in vulnerability management. And additionally, different products bring different third-party vendors. Some third-party vendors are more transparent and they give you the information that you need. Some of them are not. And I know we do, want to control it upfront with some of the obligations in licensing, but some of the licensing things are put in place far earlier of when even a product is in ideation, right? Like it's a technology stack and a license that was put in place for some previous products that is continuing on. And so it's harder to control that part of it. And then there are proprietary binary blobs, right? And that's more in the legacy devices, I would say. But that produces its own challenge. And then if you look at all of this being reflected in the SBOM, you use tools and you use different tools, but then you have manual updates. So it's a complex world, right? You got to do those manual updates to kind of keep up with having the right information and decrease the vulnerability noise. So those are like top 4 challenges, and you know I'm sure there are others that I'm not talking about, but I kind of picked the 4 based on my experience. Now I wanted to sort of also paint the picture of like what can you do, right, given that these challenges exist. And some of these potential strategies are things that we are doing. One of them is standardizing on a single SBOM format, right? You could do Cyclone DX or SPDX. And again, the whole variety of tools, embedded versus cloud, they push back on this. But if you standardize on the SBOM format, I think there's a lot to be said. It's easier to do some of the things that you have to do down the chain. And then introducing SBOM templates per product type. And for example, I know Cassie has some experience with this, to use some standard formats that are available, some tools that is a potential solution. Also using standardized metadata, to force that and to enforce it automatically so that you don't get different metadata from different tools. You try to make that a little uniform. The other one, this one, the automated generation of SBOMs through CI/CD pipelines, I think that's a real winner, right? Like we've done that and it does help, but you have to set that up, it's not for free. You set it up with each product. But once you set it up, you're going to have, success in scaling because you're able to automate this. And then I did add this here. I know this is kind of a little contradictory to what we were saying earlier. Sometimes you may want to limit the SBOM scope, right? And I'm talking like which level of transitive noise you need, and it comes down to risk, right? Like what is the risk of that component? How far into the dependency chain you need to go, right? Sometimes direct dependencies may be enough. Although I know, Cassie was just saying, you probably need more than that. So I think that's debatable. And then enrich SBOM components, right? So you try to get the manufacturer, the PURL, the version, lifecycle, and usually all this is available through a tool, or even, in the case of Yocto Linux, it produces through the Linux chain. So enriching the SBOM components does help you to manage it, so where it's coming from. But nevertheless, it does require some more manual work to kind of use that information. So I think that might be the last slide. I think, Cassie, do you want to add anything more?
Well, I just wanted to say for managing SBOMs, I think that I didn't put it on the slide, but there is work on the OWASP Cyclone DX Project T, Transparency Exchange API, because right now I think most of us are struggling to push SBOMs, especially between 2 suppliers, if you have subcomponents and such, or to your customers. So that one is in beta. So I think for when it comes to managing SBOMs, there is work still to do moving across those SBOMs. Also, just in general, what you were talking about is really by product type, but you have an overall a single system. And so system SBOMs are still quite a bit a challenge. So having a tool that can manage and bring multiple SBOMs together so that you can represent the architecture clearly, to be able to say, this is what we're presenting to the FDA or a customer, to say it's actually a mixture of 3 different SBOMs because you have different aspects to it because it's an edge device and it goes to a cloud system. So there's probably about 20 other things that I think people can talk about strategies to manage SBOMs. But it is Definitely on the maturity curve, we're past the crawl to the walk stage, but we're not at the run. There's not a lot of automation unless you buy tools specifically that can help manage the SBOMs.
Yeah, well said. There are a few questions, Cassie.
Great.
We can try to tackle them. Um, there's a question from a regulatory perspective. Is it necessary to maintain an SBOM for SSDLC of a system tools that support QMS and production systems used in medical device manufacturing? So it's regarding tools and whether or not you need to maintain an SBOM. So I'm going to tackle it, but I'm not 100% sure. But the SBOM that's being requested, from what I can see in the guidance, and if Justin's still here, he might be able to comment too, is for products only. I don't see it for tools. So if the question is around tools, then that's not in the guidance. Right now, it's more about the product itself.
This is Justin, that's correct. The request is for the marketed device.
Okay, great.
I did want to mention that definitely if someone's leveraging NIST SSDF, it talks a lot about the security of the tools. So it's definitely important. For example, there are many GitHub actions with CVEs and critical CVEs in them. So you need to, just as good practice from a product security standpoint, make sure the tools that you're leveraging have a good security posture.
Yep, absolutely. What is the best tool technique to generate CPE for components along with the URL in the SBOM? The best tool or technique for components along with PURL and SBOM. I'm not sure the context of the question because there are many tools and the tools depend upon the tech stack.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that I can answer that question.
Right. It would be completely dependent on the capability
tech
of the
stack.
tool. Yeah.
Yep. The next question, with that SBOM dependency example in mind, has there been any conversation or discussion in the regulatory and compliance spaces around fourth-party supply chain risk management? I feel like the industry struggles enough with third-party, but I have heard from other security peers about their attempts to manage fourth-party risk.
I guess that's more of a question for the regulators. I think that overall, this is the transitive dependency, the fourth party dependency question. My opinion, I'm not a regulator, is that if you are incorporating something, you need to understand your full supply chain to the best of your ability, which means that you're examining potential fourth party and nth party risk as part of this. Now, you may not have that visibility, and it may be an unknown to you. For example, I always love to mention that I don't have the SBOM for the .NET DLLs, yet I had Windows systems. So there is a lot of unknowns still out there, but actually, in regards to the risk, there can be some level of monitoring that you can put in place if you have that awareness, at least where to start. But I don't know if anybody in the regulatory wants to make any comment on this.
I mean, I would agree with that response.
Okay.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm just going to read one last question here. MDMs need to share SBOMs for only software components on the attack surface. Some of medical devices have multiple subsystems, and some of these may not be in the exploit path. This will also reduce the number of CVEs that need to be analyzed. What's your perspective on this? Typically, SBOMs are at a product level, right? So maybe these are systems and subsystems. So the question is, should we do anything more if there is a subsystem that's not in the exploit path? I think it comes down to risk. I think, if you have an overall system SBOM and there are some parts of that subsystem where it's not exploitable, it's low risk, basically. I would say not exploitable, but more low risk. Then I think that you could kind of limit the level of depth you go into that. that sort of my 2 cents, but I don't know if Cassie, you or
Yeah,
Justin have other perspectives.
I want to point out what Justin mentioned earlier about threat modeling. I have seen threat modeling still not strong enough that should represent, like, how are you certain that it's not an exploitable path? And the best way to do that is through proper threat modeling. So I think that if you can prove that it is not on the exploit path with that threat modeling, then that's your, essentially answer. But the quality there, I think, needs to mature.
Yeah, I agree. All right, I think we are at time. So Cassie, thank you for being a co-presenter. That was great. Justin, thank you for answering our questions here on the regulatory side. I'll hand it over to Hans.